Erwin Rommel, also known as the Desert Fox, was a successful general for the German military during World War I and World War II. During his 33 years of service, he triumphantly won a great majority of the battles he fought. Tragically, on October 14, 1944, Adolf Hitler suspected Rommel to be connected to an assassination attempt, so he forced Rommel to commit suicide. On the 15th of November, 1891, Erwin Rommel was born in Heidenheim, Germany. His father was a schoolmaster, and his mother was the daughter of a local government official. When he was a child, he was said to be very gentle and was often very sick. Originally, he wanted to be an engineer and had interests in mathematics and technology. This all changed, however, when his father urged him to join the military. He decided to follow his father's advice and join the 124th Wardenburg Infantry Regiment. In addition to this, he also started studying at the Officer Cadet School in 1910 and graduated in 1911. World War I is where Rommel's long career of triumphs in battle began. For example, during September of 1914, Rommel won his first Iron Cross. He did this by charging 3 French soldiers single-handedly. In the process, he wounded his leg and was hospitalized. Towards the end of the war, Rommel was tasked with taking Italian positions high on Mount Maggiore, Italy. His assault lasted from the 24th of October, 1917 to the 27th. After snaking up to Colivret Ridge on the 25th, Rommel and his men found Italian soldiers hunkered down in their trenches. He decided to lead his men into the Italian positions from the rear, and in just minutes they took hundreds of prisoners. Not long later, however, the Italians counterattacked and rifle fire rained down from far above Colivret. Rommel knew that defense was out of the question, so he split his forces into 3 groups. The first and second groups held off the Italians, while he led the third group into a hidden position near the enemy lines. The Italians turned their focus on Rommel and the third group, but when they did, the second group charged their now exposed flank. The entire Italian force surrendered and brought the total prisoner count to around 1,500. After taking 2 small villages of reserve troops and bringing his total prisoner count to 5,100, Rommel approached the peak of Mount Maggiore and something incredible happened. Upon the mere sight of Rommel and his men, 1,500 Italian soldiers surrendered because of how terrified they were of them. Soon after this, Rommel led the final assault on Mount Maggiore. He had his machine guns keep a suppressive fire on an Italian base near the peak of the mountain, while he led a handful of infantry up the side of the mountain. Knowing the battle was over, the Italian commander immediately surrendered upon Rommel and his men's arrival. Over those few days, Rommel and his men triumphantly over 52 hours of continuous combat, took 18 miles of Italian territory, climbed 2 total miles, and captured a total of 9,000 Italian soldiers. In addition, only 6 of Rommel's men died and only 30 were wounded. For all of this, Rommel was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Imperial Germany's highest military honor, and he was only a lieutenant. Rommel made a very good first impression to Adolf Hitler. In September of 1936, Rommel was posted to be one of Hitler's escorts for the Nazi rally in Nuremberg, Germany. One day, Hitler decided to go for a drive, and casually mentioned that no more than 6 cars should follow him. Rommel took this seriously, and he counted the cars behind him and stopped the rest. The high-ranking officials that were stopped were furious and sent complaints to Hitler. Upon receiving these complaints, Hitler personally congratulated Rommel for a job well done. Even though Rommel was loyal to Hitler and respected him, he wasn't a Nazi. There's a big argument about this, but based on the facts, I don't believe he was. For example, Rommel refused orders from his superiors, such as the execution of Free French fighters and black soldiers. If he was a Nazi, it's safe to assume that he would have followed his orders, no questions asked. In addition, if he didn't support things like the previously mentioned executions, then he most likely didn't support the Holocaust. By late 1940, the Desert War began. This is what Rommel got his legendary nickname, the Desert Fox, from. The Italians were suffering many defeats in North Africa, so Hitler sent Rommel and the newly formed Afrika Korps to aid them. Not long after arriving to North Africa, Rommel had pushed the British 8th Army out of most of Libya and forced them to retreat to a small Libyan village named Gazala. The 8th Army occupied Gazala for a few months, and while they were there, they established a line of fortifications and minefields around the village. Rommel took the offensive on May 26, 1942. The Italian infantry attacked the front, while Rommel led his panzers around the edge of the fortifications to cut off the 8th Army's supply routes. There, the 8th Army outnumbered Rommel 2-1, but they wasted their advantage by not using their tanks properly. After 3 weeks of fighting, the 8th Army abandoned Gazala. On October 23, 1942, the British launched Operation Lightfoot, the largest artillery bombardment since World War I. After the attack, Rommel and the remainder of his men quickly recovered and stopped the British from advancing until they eventually called off the attack. Rommel had won most of the battles in North Africa, but November 1, 1942 marks the day that his triumphs began to end. On this day, the British launched an attack on the Afrika Korps at Kidney Ridge, Egypt. At first, he was able to resist the attack, but Rommel later decided that he no longer had the resources to hold his line and ordered his troops to withdraw on November 3rd. This didn't go as planned, though. Hitler overruled him and the Germans were forced to stay and fight. The next day, the British pushed forward and broke their lines. In danger of being surrounded, Rommel retreated. Many of the soldiers on foot were captured because of them not being able to move fast enough. Rommel would have eventually been captured if it wasn't for a rainstorm on November 6th. During the El Alamein campaign, half of Rommel's 100,000-man army was either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. He also lost 450 tanks and 1,000 guns. While Rommel took these huge blows, the British only suffered 13,500 casualties and 500 other tanks were damaged. In addition, 350 of these tanks were repaired and took part in future battles. This was such a huge event that some called it the turning point in the war. For example, Winston Churchill said, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." By May 7th, the Desert War was lost and all Axis forces in North Africa surrendered and over 150,000 men were taken prisoner. Towards the end of the war, Rommel and many of his peers began to realize that Hitler has become out of control. Because of this, an assassination plan was soon developed, but Rommel knew nothing about it. However, he did know that his peers began to have meetings in secret, and he was invited to one. There, they asked him if anything were to happen to Hitler, if Rommel would take the position of head of state. They did this because he was a figure loved by the common people, and sometimes called the People's Marshal. He agreed that he would, but since there was hidden meaning behind the question, so he made it known that he did not support an assassination. He believed that even though Hitler was a very dangerous man, he still deserved a fair trial. An assassination attempt did take place, but it failed. Hitler soon found out that Rommel was involved and sent 2 generals to visit him. The generals told Rommel that he was going to die, but they gave him 2 options. The first and most ideal for both parties was that Rommel would kill himself, but his family would be unharmed and he would be buried with military honors. The second is that he would be publicly executed and his family would most likely be harmed. The first choice was the most ideal because Rommel was an idol to the common people. If the public saw him executed, there would have been much chaos in the streets of Germany.
To the general's relief, Rommel chose the first option. He then went to see his wife and son for the last time. Sadly, his visit didn't last long, and the 2 generals escorted Rommel out of his home and drove him far out of town. He was then given 2 cyanide capsules and left alone in the back of the car to tragically die alone. Shortly after this, Hitler made a believable excuse to explain Rommel's death, but he kept his promise. Rommel was buried with military honors, and his family went on with life unharmed.
Rommel's death was a contribution to the Germans' defeat in World War II. His militaristic skills would have been very useful in the later battles of the war. If he was still alive, the war could have ended very differently.